So here's the symptoms. Volvo V70 2001 petrol 2.4. The idle speed fluctuates once the car's warmed up. You're sitting in traffic and it'll stumble to about 500 RPM, then recover to 1200, then resettle down again. Hopefully I'll catch it on this video. And then the next step, I'm going to go for cleaning out the ETM first, checking for some air leaks. And as you can see, it's just tripped up there while I was talking. Quite a common failure, the ETMs on the Volvos, the V70s and the S60s I believe. I'm hoping it's just a build up of carbon on the throttle plate and in the housing. Maybe I'll find an air leak while I'm working on it too. But the rest of this video will be removing the ETM. Hopefully I'm going to get the whole thing out and give it a good clean on the bench. So we're back on the V70 2001 petrol, and we're on to cleaning the electronic throttle module, more widely known as the ETM. I'm just going to quickly try and get to this and clean it, possibly in situ. If not, I'll remove it to clean it. And if you're going to remove it, you will need the gasket that goes between the ETM module and the inlet manifold. To get a few of the things out of the way, firstly, this being the turbo model, got a few bits of plastic to move. This main cross pipe can come out of the way. You need a flat drive screwdriver for the band clamp down there, and you've got the same affair at the other end, which is accessible over the back of the engine bay. Bringing a screwdriver in from this side, you'll have two Torx 25 screws holding the main pipe to the engine. One's here on top of the inlet manifold, and the other one's here on the front of the inlet manifold. You'll also need to be removing, in this case breaking, the band clamp that holds the induction tube from the mass airflow meter. You'll obviously need to unplug that. You may as well get this stuff out of the way, give us improved access. The hose here for the servo, you've got to be careful of this wire piece, it's easy to break. Loosen the clamps using a pair of pliers. I used an angled pair of pliers to get onto those. This type just improves access and squeezes those spring clamps up together. There's also a couple of sensors down on the boost pipe itself to remove. So we'll get that stuff out of the way and then come back and see how much more work we've got to do. Okay, just a quick tip here, when you take the main boost pipe off, you've now got nothing protecting the intake side of the engine. So take a ball of tissue or rag, just stuff it in the entrance to the hole there. Do the same at the other end, prevents anything dropping down into the turbo. Because you can quite easily drop a nut or a bolt or a mouse into one of these openings, and it'll only become apparent once you start the car that it's now all over. Right, so with the airbox out of the way, the main cross pipe for the turbo and some of the air hoses disconnected, I've managed to get all that out. This all pretty well pulls out once you've got the hoses and the plugs disconnected. There's no additional bolts holding any of that in, just clips. As you can see, the access is pretty dark down there. Can't really see a great deal what's going on, but you basically have a band clamp wrapped around the intake hose as it comes up. The screw fitting, or the screw head for the band clamp in this case, is facing in this direction, so I've got the head of the bolt here and it threads through that way. Now access with the fan cowling in position is a bit restricted there. I believe it probably can be done with a bit of fiddling, but I just looked at the mounting holes for the rad fan cowling and the plastics in front or behind of the rad here. It doesn't look like a great deal to get apart. Just got to disconnect the plug, take away any of the hose clips and guides for the hoses up here, and then you've just got a 10mm bolt there and a 10mm bolt up here, and that lot should come out.
There's another electrical connector down here with a small wire on it. One fan trim and fan unit removed. Should improve access no end. Right, so to get a better view of what's going on under there, I'm just going to try and aim the camera up into the depths. Okay, so there's a limited amount I can do with the zoom here, but you can see the idea. The boost pipe that comes from the intercooler in this case is the one with the two sensors on it, and it comes up to the ETM module here, and you can see the band clamp fastener there. Doesn't look too corroded, so I'm hopeful. And you can see the electrical connector there, which leads around the electrical conduit, covers it up, and renowned on Volvos for crumbling away this conduit, so before you take the task on, it might be advisable to get yourself some. And it comes around, and you see where the conduit carries along behind this power steering hose here, and then that goes behind the starter motor bracket before it reaches a connector plug, which is a bit of a pain, because if you want to get the whole thing out, you have to at the very least loosen that starter bracket to get the plug past it. Under here you can also see the starter motor connector. This is a good reason to disconnect the battery at this point, or even prior to the job beginning. Prevents you shorting out any electrical components inside the ETM by bridging it with a ratchet or a spanner. So there it is, folks. I might see if I can leave the camera in there and get the ratchet on there at the same time, and then we can have a look inside. And I'll just add at this point, when I was taking out the fan cover, you've got to be careful not to damage these radiator fins. If you puncture a hole through one of these water gullies, it's going to cause a leak, and the only realistic repair is to replace the rad. So be careful, don't give it too much grief. Okay, so with the ratchet on it, this is a good point to remember. A lot of these band clamps use a flat drive screwdriver slot through the middle. It's a lot easier and a lot more secure, and you get better drive if you use a 7mm socket on a quarter drive set, and you improve the amount of drive that you get to the fastener. Prevents it slipping off quite so easily. Okay. Let's see if we can get a look up inside there. As you can see, got a fair bit of carbon build up there, and that's going to bind on that throttle plate, the throttle butterfly, which quite often causes it to stumble at idle. hesitation on acceleration, and just general underperformance. The main issue with these ETMs lies inside the throttle position sensor housings and the circuit boards inside. So cleaning the ETM is widely considered a temporary repair. This is the throttle position sensor inside, which has a sweeper arm inside which sweeps across a resistor bar or a group of resistor bars, and that feeds back the information to the ECU. And then inside here, the mechanical movement is what wears them out, and the solution is to replace with a contactless throttle position sensor, which you can get specialists to do for you or buy the component yourself. So for today's mission, we're going to stick to cleaning this throttle butterfly, and I think I'm going to do it in situ just because of the time limits I'm now under. If I did want to go ahead and remove it, it would be this 10mm here, which is in the centre of the screen, that 10mm there, and then there'll be another two. You can just about see the third one and the fourth one, and the fourth one is around the back there somewhere. So time to get a toothbrush and some carburetor cleaner or throttle body cleaner, get in there and give it a scrub. I'm just going to try and give you a look of inside this throttle body. I'm going to go and cycle the ignition on and operate the accelerator pedal. Now, as you've got other plugs off at this point, I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you have a code reader in order to reset any fault codes that show up. So I'm going to turn the ignition on, operate the throttle, and hopefully that'll give you a view inside. Okay, so in order to get to both sides of the throttle plate, I've just wedged in a toilet roll holder there, cardboard one. That just fits nicely across the front edge of the throttle plate and allows me to clean up around the back without having to keep pushing the throttle plate manually. And you're just looking to clean up all around the edges of where that throttle butterfly is going to meet the throttle housing or come close to meeting it, and all around the edge of the plate itself. And then to do the other side, you can either move the holding device across to the other side of the throttle plate, and then you can clean the front side of the housing and do your best to get to the top side of the throttle butterfly itself. Just a little tip there to show you that you can hold that open when it's all in situ, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to this once it's cleaned up and start reassembling it. Okay, so at this point I'm not entirely happy I'm getting the ETM clean enough, and as I've got all the air boxes out, I've got the boost pipe out that goes under the manifold there. I've decided it's not much more work to get this ETM out altogether, and the access to the starter motor bracket is greatly improved. If we look down here, we can see the back of the bracket. There's a 10mm bolt there, and there's another one about 2 inches below it, or a 10mm nut, sorry. I've only loosened those off by a few turns. And then there's another bolt facing the block here, which is 12 or 13mm. That one comes all the way out, and then you'll be able to move the bracket enough on its, in fact look, the bracket comes all the way up, which I didn't realise before. So with the bolt out that holds it to the block, we can then just slide the starter backing bracket off. I don't know if this is going to come all the way off or not. No, it's not. But it's going to give me enough slack, because it's got elongated holes, in order to get to the wiring behind it
and disconnect the ETM altogether, get the cables passed and remove it from the car. And at this point it's fair to say, make sure your battery's either disconnected, because we've got exposed live cables here, or disconnect it from under here, which I think is a 13mm nut. Then you can remove the cable and put it out of harm's way, and then that'll isolate and make this area safe to work in. Okay, so with the main boost pipe out of the way, it should give us improved access back here. I'm going to get to these 10mm bolts. Okay, let's try and zoom out a bit. You can see I've got one there, which is nearest the starter motor. I've got one up here, which is closest to me, and then the other front one, and then finally there's a fourth rear one. I'm not sure if the camera's picking this up, but it's there, easy to access. Another point worth noting, once we've got the cables past this starter motor bracket, so there's the bracket, the bolt hole for the engine, and then the loom, which is here now on the outside of it, was tucked around the back of it. And I'll just show you where it's loose there. You can hold that away from the block. The loom comes past it, and then now that can stay out of there altogether, we can retighten that bracket, tighten the bolt into the engine block first, and then tighten the two 10mm, and then that allows us to service this ETM a lot easier in the future if we need to. Another point you might want to consider is, while you've got all of this out, you've got your PCV track there. Once the ETM is out, that's going to be nice and accessible. So if you're going to intend on doing that job at all, then you may as well do it now. Okay, so just make sure those connections are covered up or disconnected for the starter motor. Like I said, battery disconnection or under bonnet boost point connection disconnected. With the final bolt out, needed a bit of a shove to get it clear. I've disconnected the plug already. You can lift the whole ETM block out. And just give you an illustration, I've spent 15 minutes, 20 minutes cleaning the underside, but this is what it looks like on the top side. And as you can see, you're not going to clean it 100% with it still on the car. So this is the underside view of the ETM as you would see it on the car, with the 4 bolt holes. The connection plug, I mean, that's bolted down, the main connection to the body of the ETM, but not something you should disturb. The disconnection of the ETM electrically happens on a lead that's probably 18 inches long. And like I say, the loom was tucked behind the starter bracket, which was easily overcome, so no major issue to get that lead out. And if you're going so far as to clean it, you might as well remove it from behind the starter while you're in there, and it gives you better access for the future. So like I say, I spent 15 or 20 minutes cleaning this, and still not satisfactory, even on the top side, but on the underside, but the engine side, as you can see, the throttle plate itself is looking pretty tarnished, but it's the parts that matter is where it contacts or comes close to contact in the throttle body. And I'm struggling to get a good light here, but as you can see, there's loads of junk in there. Try not to drop this or knock it about too much, because giving it some abuse is likely to introduce a problem with the electronic side of it. These end caps here contain the throttle position sensor, sweep arms and the resistor tracks. Each time your accelerator is pushed, the motor in here, which is over this side, will turn slightly to open and close the throttle butterfly. And there's a throttle position sensor on the end caps here, and they're the parts that wear out. When you replace it with a contactless TPS, it's the end here, I believe, opposite the motor that you replace. You would remove the torque screws. I've got a feeling you may even need to remove the back panel here as well. And then you end up cutting and splicing and soldering some of the wires. I'm not getting involved with that today because I don't have another TPS, and I'm just interested in cleaning it. So toothbrush and carburetor cleaner and then we'll come back to that, take a look. So here's the result after about 30 minutes of cleaning with a carburetor cleaner and a toothbrush. You might find something slightly better to do this with, but that's what I've got available to me. And although the body of the ETM is still a bit grubby, the insides, which is where it's important, we've got a nice fresh clean bore all the way around the edge. Some of this ingrained dirt there is part of the pitting of the aluminium, so I'm not realistically going to get absolutely everything out of it, but the contact surfaces and the surfaces that allow air to pass through, well, they're all clean. So I'm just going to let that dry off a bit more. There was silicone gasket sealant around here, which I don't believe is original factory, so I've scraped all that off with a utility knife blade. So that's now ready for the gasket. I've just got to make sure the inlet manifold side is also clean. Bit of a clean up around the band clamp securing point, and it can all go back into the car. And the loom we can leave outside of the starter motor, and it would pay you to replace the conduit on here while you're here as well. And then we can resecure the plug in a new location, and it'll provide better access for the future if we need it. So I'm just going to go and clean up what's left on the inlet. New gasket, bolts back in, and rebuild the car. So now I've got the inlet manifold clean as well, shiny and clean. I've got all the nasty gasket sealer off that the previous attendant had put on there, obviously in a bid to try and seal up an air leak. I'm now going to put the metal crush gasket back between the ETM and the throttle body, back between the ETM and the inlet manifold, and fit it all back together. So just a final note on this job now. It's pretty well reverse order of removal, but you can see with all of the pipe work out of the way, it's relatively easy with a light source to see that you've got the gasket in there with the bolts going through the relevant holes. And it's nice, good visibility with the pipes out of the way and the fan cowling removed to see what you need to see down there. There's plenty of space. So I think that the fan cowling is well worth it for the sake of an extra 10 minutes on the total job time. Okay, another point worth noting while we're down in this neck of the woods is the starter motor wire, and these V70s do suffer with a poor contact, sometimes just loose, sometimes they get dirty, and it's the small wire that's inside this conduit here, and it fits onto a blade terminal. So it might be a good opportunity while we're here, take it off, give it some contact cleaner and reinstall, just to extend the life of that terminal, because it can cause a non-crank, non-start condition, and while we've got good access to it, it makes sense to carry out a bit of preventative maintenance. I'm just going to throw one last tip into this video. The band clamp for the intake to, or the band clamp for the ETM to the boost pipe, the fixing the fastener I've moved around to behind the inlet manifold so that I can get onto it with an extension and a 7mm socket, and I can do that from behind between the inlet manifold and the starter, and then it means I won't have to remove the fan cowling in the future if I just want to access that to remove it. So the final part of the procedure for this task, replacement or cleaning of the ETM, is leaving the ignition on for 10 minutes before you try starting the car. And the idea behind that is to allow the computer to establish a 0 point for the throttle butterfly with the engine off, and that will then allow it to relearn a idle point and then it'll relearn the rest of the parameters as you drive it. Ignition on. I've knocked my side lights down off of dipped beam daytime running lights down to side lights, and I've also got a battery charger on to maintain a good voltage, and then hopefully you're going to have a smooth running car. And this is the after repair situation with the idle speed. The engine's a bit cooler than it was when I showed you at the beginning of the video, but it gives a good indication of what the idle speed's doing even when it's up to temperature now. Much more stable, doesn't fluctuate around, doesn't cause the car to engage gear when you're in slow moving traffic, and generally a lot more pleasurable to drive the car and improve performance all round really. So no reason not to give this a go for preventative maintenance or to cure a fluctuating idle speed or general poor performance.